The 10th richest man in the world, Michael Dell, cannot stop tweeting about Bitcoin. At the same time, he's selling billions of his own Dell stock. So is Michael Dell buying Bitcoin? This story is getting so much attention that even the mainstream media is being forced to talk about this. I'll talk about all this and more with my buddy Luke. So Luke, how you doing? And let's pull up this clip of Fox Business, talking about Michael Dell buying Bitcoin.
Michael Dell put out a tweet. He put out a poll. Did you hear about this? And in this poll, he asked, what is the most important thing to you in your life? Is it Bitcoin? Is it AI? Is it love and relationships, or none of the above? 43% said Bitcoin. 39% said love and relationships. But I mean, clearly a lot of Bitcoin aficionados like Michael Saylor dropped in and probably punched that up. But you've got Michael Dell as a multi-billionaire. And then you've got people who are just regular folks. Michael Dell put out a tweet. He put out a...
So that's the clip. And I think it's very interesting for a number of reasons. Before I dive down some rabbit holes, Brandon, what's your initial thoughts about that clip?
Yeah, man, I think it's, just part of the course, right? I mean, Michael Dell has seen his own stocks shore up because of AI. He's an original computer guy. We've actually talked about this on a couple past live streams, how, maybe he was getting into it, but it seems to just make sense, right? I mean, Michael Dell was like Steve Jobs before Steve Jobs, right? Getting into that full, computing capability and everything like that. So he's one of the OGs in the tech space. So it just makes sense that he's now getting into Bitcoin as, the digital native currency of the internet. So I see it as a complete synergy, and I think it makes complete sense. But I'd love to hear what you got to add to it, Luke.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting for a number of reasons. One of those was looking at how quickly Michael Dell's opinion has changed. So the poll that Fox News was talking about was the most recent poll that Michael Dell ran. This was on June 28th from memory. And in this poll, he mentioned Bitcoin by name. And only a week earlier, he ran a very similar poll, but instead of having Bitcoin as the option was blockchain. So I think it's interesting to see how quickly maybe Michael Dell is getting out of his blockchain phase. What do you think about that, Brandon?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's starting to do more research and get into it, right? He was even pictured on Michael Saylor's yacht with him too. So I'm sure Michael Saylor got in his ear to kind of help describe the differences between Bitcoin and blockchain. And I think it's important to note all of that. And I don't think it can be understated, Michael Dell's influence on traditional, tech and traditional media, right? I mean, I think, we were talking about this a little bit pre-show, Luke, that, traditional media doesn't really like to put Bitcoin in a positive light, but now they're forced to talk about it because the 10th richest man in the world is tweeting about it constantly. It seems like it's a day in and day out thing. But I think what's the most interesting part of that poll that she didn't even really point out is that AI was very small percentage of that. And they're equating in the mainstream media a large portion of Dell stock to be shooting up because of AI. I mean, we even have this, this article here from Bloomberg saying that Michael Dell plans to record a $2.9 billion share sale this year, and that his hardware company has surged because of AI optimism. So that's in the main headline of this Bloomberg article. But if you go back to the poll that Michael Dell put out, I think it's this one, or maybe it's this one here. If you do all that, AI is only 9.3%. So it's still a very small portion of that. So I think, with all that being said, it is interesting to me how minimal AI is being talked about in comparison to the Bitcoin boom of his tweets and what he's sort of paying attention to.
Yeah, well, in that video, we are going to come back to having a look at, how much stock Michael Dell is selling, because that could open up some really interesting rabbit holes. A lot of people are trying to, they're speculating right now. Are there billionaires buying Bitcoin? Is Michael Dell one of them? We're going to come back to that. But I think let's open up that can of worms regarding what that Fox News anchor actually said in that interview. She said, Bitcoin was voted as the most important thing on this poll, but just ignore that because Michael Saylor and all of the Bitcoin aficionados, they went in there and skewed the results. Well, is that true? I mean, Michael Dell has 700,000 followers on Twitter. How many of those do you think are really Bitcoiners? Okay. And firstly, how many hardcore Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maximalists do you really think there are on Twitter? I don't think there's 700,000. I really don't think there's 700,000. So I think the cope coming out of the mainstream media is very interesting. And I think, like you mentioned, it's very interesting to see AI just not even be talked about. 6 to 12 months ago, everybody thought AI was a new craze. Everybody was launching these companies with AI in their name. And it really does look as if a lot of that buzz and hype has kind of died down a lot.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. I think, the AI buzz hasn't really died down in the mainstream media, but it seems like, like amongst the plebs or amongst the people on Twitter, it doesn't seem to be a big thought, right? I mean, we've even had Twitter launch like their own like Grok and all that. We see all these companies launching AI tools, but realistically, Dell would see a big stock price bump because of, the AI boom. But with all that being said, it's really more about Bitcoin. And I think, it's not all about the maxis, right? I mean, like we said, we're on Bitcoin Twitter, but is Bitcoin Twitter really that big to sway the vote? My personal opinion, I don't think so either. And I think that you got the same one there, Luke. So let's get back to the original poll that he ran, though, when he talked about quantum computing, AI, and blockchain. So we saw the big difference here, right, where we see AI at almost 34%. And then, just a week later, you see 9.3% when he mentions Bitcoin. So what do you take from all that, Luke? And do you think it's more Bitcoin, not blockchain, and that's why people are gravitating towards AI maybe in the earlier poll?
Yeah, so I think Michael Dell added something really important in the second poll. He changed the wording from blockchain to Bitcoin. That's a big difference. Second thing he did was he added something about love and relationships. So we can see by the poll, far and away, Bitcoin and love and relationships in the newer poll were far more popular than AI. Okay, so again, this is massive. Like you say earlier, he's an AI company and his stock price has gone absolutely bananas. And this is why, a lot of people, this is why I think this is another explanation for why he's actually selling stock right now. So there's obviously the speculation, actually, looking at, is he buying Bitcoin? He's tweeting about Bitcoin. But if I were to actually maybe try to share a chart so that people can see Michael Dell's stock, it's gone pretty parabolic right now. So this is the share price of Dell's stock. Again, this is like a 4-year chart, 2019 to 2024. Really hard to, manipulate this to make it look a certain way. You can see pretty clearly it's up 300% since the beginning of 2023. Okay. So again, it could be natural that Michael Dell, just sells a little bit of stock because it's gone up so much. Maybe he's locking in some profits. So I think that is kind of the other side of the argument. There's a more speculative argument. Is he selling stock to buy Bitcoin? Maybe he could be doing both. Maybe he's selling stock because it's overpriced and he's rebalancing to Bitcoin. Again, I think that's interesting. Bitcoin seems to be on his mind. And I think it all started 2 weeks ago on June 20th when he tweeted, what was it? Scarcity creates abundance. That was the first tweet that ever happened. And as we know, Bitcoin is the only thing in the world as scarce as our time.
Yeah, and I hear you on that. And I think, with all that being said, I think he had to be researching Bitcoin a little bit before then, right? I mean, he's an AI guy. He's in the computer space. He's doing all that kind of stuff in the tech space. So I think it was just kind of par for the course. I think this moment was going to come. I think, he is the 10th richest man in the world. So maybe he didn't necessarily need to invest in Bitcoin at some point in time earlier on because he made a lot of money on his Dell stock. He made a lot of money on his own company. But I think he's realizing the what everybody else is sort of realizing, where the U.S. government is printing massive amounts of money. They're devaluing our currency of the U.S. dollar, and there needs to be something that's digitally scarce. And what is the most digitally scarce thing in the world? It is Bitcoin. So I think that that's going to continue. And Luke, you have any thoughts on that?
Nothing else. I think we framed up both sides of the story for the listeners. Maybe I can put you on the spot at the end of today's video and get you to make a bet which one you think it is, whether Michael Dell's is selling stock because it's overpriced or whether he's buying Bitcoin. But I think before we get there, I think it's always important to kind of remember what Bitcoin's about. I mean, a lot of people, speculate about what's going on in the Bitcoin ETFs. We speculate about what billionaires are buying Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, all of it is absolutely irrelevant unless you're holding your own Bitcoin in self-custody. I was actually writing an article on the weekend for an email that I'm going to push out. And I was shocked at how many people still have Bitcoin on exchanges. If you have a look at exchanges, there's 580 million people who have bought crypto or Bitcoin in 2024. Again, 580 million, that's massive. It's like 8% of the world. But if you have a look at how many people actually self-custody Bitcoin on chain, it's much more like 40 million people. So that's like 6 to 7% of the people who have bought Bitcoin or crypto or have an exchange at, Kraken, Binance, or Coinbase. Only 6 to 7% of those people actually self-custody the Bitcoin. That's massive, and that absolutely shocked me, Brandon, which is why I think we're both so, passionate about self-custody.
100%. And, that's why I've been lucky enough to partner with Foundation to help bring people towards self-custody, because I think, Luke, as you're saying it, that's the number one thing that I think Bitcoiners should really put a pressure or put some stress on, is getting your Bitcoin off an exchange. You can use a Foundation device at foundation.xyz. They got great passports. They got the sleekest looking hardware wallets in the game. And they've even got an app or a concierge service if you're nervous about doing it yourself. And, with all that too, they encourage to, put your seed phrase on a stamp seed, a metal titanium plate where you can hammer that in and you won't get hacked on any password manager or anything like that. And you can use promo code Green Candle for both of those. You'll get $10 off of Foundation. You'll get 15% off of there. So I like to call that the Green Candle bundle. You could get them both and securely store your Bitcoin off of an exchange. And if you're looking for, a way to help educate some people, I was actually at the Naples meetup last night, and I was handing out some of these Bitcoin trading cards. The Genesis pack was actually a huge hit. There was a wide range of demographic there in Naples. It's usually a little bit older retirement community, but having that physical aspect of the Bitcoin trading cards to really orange pill those people and teach about a lot of the subjects that can be complex when it comes to Bitcoin, kind of break them down in a nice and easy, digestible manner. I think this is one of the best ways to orange pill some people, and you can do all that using promo code Green Candle to save 10% off on there as well. So a lot of great stuff. So check out Stamp Seed, Foundation, and Bitcoin trading cards. But you alluded to it earlier, Luke, a little bit about about what I think Michael Dell is doing with all of his selling. And I'm going to go out on the list. I think he's Mr. 100, man. I think he's out there buying a bunch of Bitcoin. And I think he might not ever disclose it, and we might not ever know. But I think, there's the coincidence, the timing lines up perfectly. But what do you think on all that? Do you think I'm right, or you think I'm absolutely crazy here?
Well, it's funny because I'm probably one of the most bull-tarded people in Bitcoin, but I'm still on the fence. I think there's a good probability that he is buying a lot of Bitcoin. I don't know if he's Mr. 100, but I do think that, he certainly could be a big whale. I think there's like at least a, 20, 30, 40% probability that I think he's buying Bitcoin. Because again, why would you be publicly tweeting about Bitcoin if you haven't actually done the work on Bitcoin, or if you don't hold some Bitcoin? So I think I think there's a good 30 to 40% chance he's probably buying Bitcoin privately, and maybe the polls are just trying to, get some attention to Bitcoin. It's like Japan's largest pension fund. They got a $1.7 trillion pension fund. They came out and they publicly said that they're going to begin investigating Bitcoin as a diversification strategy. Like, as if you're not already publicly holding Bitcoin when you're making those, public announcements. I'd be shocked if they're not privately holding Bitcoin. So yeah, I think I always like to see all of the data before getting, full bull-tarded and making wild speculations and assertions. But I think there's at least a, 20, 30, 40% probability that Michael Dell's sitting on a nice big fat Bitcoin stack.
Yeah, and it's crazy that we're talking about this in 2024, where the 10th richest man in the world is is potentially buying Bitcoin. And so I guess time will tell, and we'll have to figure all that out. But Luke, thanks so much for joining me, and yeah, man, we'll see you guys all in the next one.
Yeah, thanks for joining.